Thank you. And I'm about to do something that I have never done before, and I'm hoping it's going to work, and we're going to find out. Can you guys see me? See the screen? All right.
Yes.
I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Okay. So in general, when we talk about and I'm gonna, in these PowerPoint slides, if I haven't put them on Moodle already, I'll put them up there today. I think there's only like 11 or 12 slides, so it's just general information about emotions. It's not necessarily different than what the book is talking about, but I do put some extra content in the slides that is not necessarily in the book. So so one of the things that there we go. One of the things that is important to remember about emotions is that there's basically levels of emotions. So a secondary emotion is most typically something you would easily see when you're working with someone, or you are also most easily identified by a person most of the time. Okay, so but a primary emotion is something that you might have to dig a little bit to find or understand, even for yourself, like a joy or an anger, a fear. Anger is one of those gray area primary emotions. Typically, anger is also caused by hurt and fear. Love, sadness. Those are just some examples. There's other examples. But the ones on the top, the secondary emotions there, most of the time we can probably identify those a little quicker than we can the primary emotions for the most part, until we learn how to identify primary emotions. And also clinically, for the most part, when we can identify primary emotions, we can actually get to change a little quicker. And we'll talk more about that as we go. One of the things that I would like for you guys to do, let me back up. One of the things I'd like for you guys to do, if you have a pen and paper handy, or if you're on your computer, or if you want to type this, it's fine. I'd like for you guys to right now take about a minute and write down any feeling, any emotion that you have. It could be one feeling or emotion. It could be 5. I don't care what it is. It could be happy. It could be ambivalent. It could be confused. It could be peaceful. It could be frustration. It could be anything. Okay. I want you to take a minute and write it down and keep it in front of you throughout this whole time that we're meeting. I'll give you a couple seconds to do that. Okay. Now keep that list. And like I said, doesn't matter to me if it's one emotion or 10, just keep that list. And we're going to refer back to it here in a little bit. I'm going to give you an example of primary and secondary emotion. And this is what I was saying earlier about anger. Anger is one of those kind of gray area places. Typically, when we talk about anger, and I could have chosen another kind of hard emotion, like shame or guilt. We could have done kind of a similar kind of picture. I just happen to have this one, and this is a good example of how a primary and secondary emotion work. Whenever you feel anger, it's anger that's expressed is especially easy to see, like as a behavior, whether it's words or actions. So that's everything above the water when we look at the iceberg. But as you go below the water, everything below the water is much bigger than what's above the water, and that's typically the emotions that are powering that behavior, that are powering that anger. And so when we think about working with folks that become angry or they escalate, and this is true for children all the way through older adulthood, we would hope that as we grow, that we would have a little bit more, have the ability to control the behavior of those really tough feelings. But sometimes it just comes out. But even in children, there's always a reason why there's a behavior. And that's true from childhood through adulthood. There's a reason why there's a behavior. It's not like random. There's a lot of times really powerful emotions underneath them, and probably some powerful thought patterns underneath them as well. And so for anger, for example, when you look at this, and you can think about it in your own life, and like grumpy, there's let me get over here. Like when we think about being grumpy, like a couple of days ago, I was just irritable and grumpy, and I was just easily, I mean, that's, if you're grumpy, you're going to be angry. It doesn't mean that you have to act a certain way, but you're just grumpy, and that can cause anger. I mean, there's reasons why we have behaviors and we say things that we do. Okay. So when we talk about early childhood, and when I've skipped past, infancy into early childhood. So now we're getting into that three-year-old all the way up into little early elementary age group, 5 or 6, something like that. And we're going to go all the way through up until around 11 or 12. So we're kind of early in the childhood, and then we're going to do some late childhood looking at emotions. One of the things that's important about emotions as kids are younger is that things like pride and shame and embarrassment and guilt become self-conscious emotions, like they begin to feel them. And that's actually important, because if you don't feel some form of those heavy emotions, it's very difficult for you to do some things later in life, like realize that other people, like when we start to feel guilt and shame early in life, especially guilt is probably one of the more important ones that you kind of want to feel early in life. If you feel it early in life, when you feel it again as you get older, what that actually signals to your brain is that, oh, there's someone else here that maybe I did something wrong. I need to repair that relationship. Versus if you don't start feeling guilt early in life, you might not feel that later in life. So that they're kind of connected with each other. Now, having said that, obviously, the goal of childhood is not to shame or guilt or embarrass children. That's not what we're talking about. This is not something where we need my kids to feel guilty. We do it automatically. it's a natural response. I tell my clients all the time that we feel guilt and shame just on our own. Like we don't need help doing it. We can do it ourselves. We can generate that ourselves. But when we have interactions with people, especially people that we care about and care about us, that generate those strong emotions, that's typically when we start having either conflict or issues. And so when we talk about early childhood, pride and guilt and shame, embarrassment, they start to become self-conscious. In other words, they start to actually know what those feelings are. So really you kind of have an emotional kind of feeling awakening when kids are little, and they're dealing with big emotions. And unfortunately, they can't express what they're feeling in words most of the time, like verbally. You know, most young children are not going to say, I really feel embarrassed right now. Most young children are not going to do that. Now you can help them try to understand which is the second bullet here. Expressing those emotions are really heavily influenced by a parent's responses to children's behaviors, not their emotions, but their behaviors, which, as we said before, the emotions and the behaviors are obviously linked, just like the thoughts. And so the behaviors don't happen for no reason. There's something going on with them. Okay, now let me take a second here. Do you guys have any questions about anything we're talking about so far?
I do.
Yeah, go for
You were saying that with the children, you should help them to express the emotions.
Mhm.
I guess my question is it better to just to expose them, to explain to them, far as like a teacher hat, to say that, okay, you're at this age, so you're going through this, so it's okay, or should you, or I'm like counseling them, trying to get
Yeah,
to the root of why they're feeling shame?
yeah, that's a really good question. So there's a couple of things to think about here. And again, when we talk about early childhood, we are talking about a fairly wide range of ages, but in general, having logical conversation. So there's two things. Number one, if a child is escalated, having a logical conversation is not going to work anyway. So it doesn't matter what you say. And actually, to be quite honest with you, that's true of adults too. If any one of us were like so escalated that we were like I've seen it. I've been in the room with this where adults are really frustrated and escalated and they're angry. Having a logical conversation doesn't work right then. That doesn't mean you can't go back later. So the first thing is with kids, especially, just because they can't always verbally express the emotion doesn't mean that they're not expressing emotion. They're probably expressing something. What I have found, and I found this little acronym through reading, and I don't think it's not original with me, but I've found it to be very helpful. It's called HALT, HALT, and this usually coincides with when there's some kind of a kind of breakdown with a kid. They're either hungry, or they're angry, or they're lonely, or they're tired. So it could be any one of those four things. And if we're being honest, that's probably true in adolescence and in adulthood too, because those four things cause us to feel things a little deeper. And what they actually do is cause us to not be able to control our behavior because of that. So it's hungry, angry, lonely, tired. The tired one for little kids is any of you that work with little children know that if a kid is tired enough, like all bets are off, man. You don't know what's going to happen. In our house, we used to call it at night the storm before the calm, not the calm before the storm. Kids just go crazy right before bed. because they're tired and they're just like, you know. But to go back and answer the question, it's much easier to have, if you're going to have any kind of discussion with a child, it's always better to do it when everybody's calm, not just the kid, but the parents. So, for example, if you end up working a lot with families or do a lot of parenting work with parents of younger children, like having the whole family together and talking through this kind of topic with them can be helpful. And I work with one of the therapists I work with, Diana, and actually two of them are really good at this. And I've learned a lot from them in terms of like how to do certain things and say certain things. One of the things that you can do is with parents, we have to be able to remember that like a lecture is never the answer, like, you know, lecturing at them, talking at them. And depending on the age, for example, if it's a 4-year-old, you can't spend more than a minute or two talking about this because they've already gone to something else, right? Besides that, this is really something where when you're having a conversation about emotions with a child, you're really not going to be going into like, oh, it seems like you're really embarrassed right now. They don't know what that is. They know what it feels like. They know the feelings of it. They don't know what those things are. Okay. They know that behavior maybe wasn't the best thing, right? It's okay for us to say things like, it seems like you're angry right now, or it seemed like your feelings were hurt. That kind of thing is fine, because what you're then doing, honestly, is you're giving examples of how to state emotions that you're feeling. I'll give you one quick example. I was working with a family, golly, this has been a while. This has been 2 or 3 years ago, I feel like. It was a mom and dad, and then they had, I feel like the kids were like 6 and they might have like a 4-year-old or 5-year-old and then a 6 or 7-year-old. Anyway, I was doing marital work with the mom and dad, but they kept talking about parenting things. So I was like, hey, just bring your kids. So they brought their kids, and we played and stuff like that. And obviously, eventually, someone had something that the other one wanted, a toy, and they kind of, got upset, blah, blah, blah. And the mom and dad, obviously they kind of probably were embarrassed because I was there. And, it's kind of an awkward situation. But all I said to one of the 5 or 6, the younger one, 4 or 5-year-old, I said, I was like, hey, it seems like, was that, did you want that? And he kind of got upset, kind of teary a little bit. So it seems like you're sad, kind of thing. And just talk to him like that. And the reason why you do that is not telling them what they're feeling, but you're telling them what you're seeing, and you're not making a judgment on them about it. You're just saying that, if you're crying, you're probably sad. Maybe we need to figure out a different way to, play with these toys. Or I can't remember everything that we said, but you don't lecture, you don't try to talk logic to them right then. One of the things that I have found technique wise to be one of the most effective when it comes to kids becoming really escalated, if you can get in front of that escalation as soon as you can, and you can change your eye level with a child. So for example, when we are just in everyday life, kids are down here and adults are up here. That's just their everyday life. And psychologically speaking, that shows dominance to us, especially for a kid. When they're escalating, if we change that and make them higher and us lower eye level wise, it will cause physiologically, it'll help them physiologically begin to calm down. Especially if we do that and then we say, hey, I'm on your team here. I'm on your side. I want to help figure out what's happening. Now, it doesn't work if they're already escalated to a point where they're, inconsolable. You have to catch it early on. But the reason why I talk about the influential piece of parents' responses is your response to their behavior is super important because it's telling them something about themselves too as they get older. I don't have time to go through the research that basically talks specifically about how a child's inner voice comes from their environment, and most of the time is started from a parent's voice to them. And if it's always negative or always shaming or always guilting, then that's their inner voice will begin to develop. Now, at the same time, no parent is a robot. None of us are perfect. There's always going to be times where we're going to be like, how can you do this? We're going to lose our cool as parents. That's not the point. That's not what I'm talking about. We can go back and repair that. We can go back and go, hey, I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry about that. Let's figure out a different way to do it. We can do that as parents. That's not the kid's job. That's our job as adults. But the influence we have really starts really early with how they think and feel. Does that all make sense? Hopefully. Any question about that?
No questions. I truly understand.
Okay, let's keep going. I don't want, I'm going to talk a little bit about like adult parent responses and then kid responses. Don't ever hear me throw parents or adults under the bus. That's not what this is about. We're the adults, right? We are supposed to act and behave and be a certain way. We can't have certain expectations of children that they're going to be a certain way all the time. They're not wired that way. There's always going to be times they're going to lose it. Unfortunately, it feels like a lot of times they lose it, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay. So when kids start understanding emotion, now again, we're talking as we get into, especially by the time they get into elementary, when they start understanding emotion, it's linked to increased pro-social behavior, which is helpful for them as they build friendships, especially as they get into adolescence. They begin to understand the same event can give very different emotions in different people. Like a dumb, goofy example, like a sporting event, if you've ever been on a soccer field or baseball field, if a team scores, one part of the whole stands is really exciting, the other part's not. I mean, those are examples. Like an event can elicit different feelings from people, and that's very important for them to understand. By 5, they begin to show this kind of growing awareness to manage emotions according to social standards. That's most children. Sometimes it's a little bit later. And sometimes that's because of things that they've experienced themselves, or something that like family expectations probably plays a role in that. But when we talk about emotional awareness, it really starts kicking in around age 5. But again, it doesn't mean that they can always express verbally what they're feeling at the time. It just means that they're aware that it's there, which is actually a good thing. That can be helpful to us. And also what that tells us is somewhere around 4, 5, 6, all human beings begin to become aware of emotions, which is good. It's only usually later in life that we either start turning them off ourselves or avoiding them or whatever. That happens later. And we'll talk about that as we get into adolescence and adulthood. regulating emotion, this is kind of what we were talking about a while ago. So regulating emotions. This is probably, I don't work with little kids anymore. I did that for a few years. What I would say for those of you that end up working in the childhood area, this will be, when parents come to you, this will be what they're really asking you. They might not say it this way, but they might be asking about emotional regulation. Sometimes it comes out as impulse control too, because that is part of emotional regulation, because it all happens in our prefrontal cortex, which is not fully developed until we're around 25 anyway, which is kind of a bummer, but that's kind of what neurologically, that's what's happening. So that does play a role in a kid's ability to manage demands and conflicts when they're interacting with other people. In other words, like how well can you handle kind of how you're feeling as you're interacting with different people, and how do those feelings, if they're big feelings, do they impact how you're interacting with other people? That could be not just friends, but siblings. That's a lot of times why you have a lot of sibling conflict. How you interact with your parents, teachers, whoever else. I like, so there's a couple of different basic approaches to emotions that have been really well researched. One of the well, let me just describe it. Emotional coaching and emotional dismissing are kind of approaches that have come out in research. And I think what's hard about this is that for a long time, probably the go-to kind of approach in parenting was more dismissal of emotion, not because people were necessarily mean or anything. We're just learning more about how to coach kids through emotions. So when we talk about emotional coaching, that's when a parent might feel like, okay, I really need to help them understand what they're feeling and what's going on and things like that. Emotional dismissing, the approach might be more like, you just need to stop doing that, basically turn that off kind of thing. Now, having said that, what we also want to know is that the context or the setting that we're in makes a lot of difference too. It actually makes a big difference. But I feel like what we fall short on sometimes, I'm venturing into opinion here, so don't go out and say, well, Dr. Bedard said, research says. I'm talking about things I've kind of experienced and read, and what we have fallen short on, I think, in the past few years is I like the emotional coaching approach. I really think it's good. But we don't just need to help kids identify and express emotion, which is not bad. We need to give them ways to work through it. Because otherwise we're helping them express it, helping them identify, which is good. But then what? Then we're not helping them do anything else. And if we don't help them do anything else, it really backfires on us later. And I'm going to talk about that specifically here in a second. But their ability to modulate their emotions and kind of understand what's going on and honestly realize that emotions come and go and are up and down, and you might not feel like this later. If we help them understand that is really powerful. Now, let me give you an example of that. You guys look at your sheet real quick that I had you write whatever emotions you had. Okay. I want you to check mark the ones that you still feel. The ones you don't feel anymore, put an X beside it. And if you have new ones, write those down. And I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that. I'm going to read through some chats here real quick as you guys do that. Okay. So if you look at your list, what would you say you learned about the emotions that you're even feeling right now? What would you say?
Well, mine
That-
stayed the same. So
Yep.
Mine changed because I actually got up out of bed, moving, eating breakfast. So I had tired as one of mine, and I'm not as tired because now I'm moving around and doing stuff.
Yeah. So actually, Meredith, I'm glad you brought that up. I used to make my kids, when they got anxious about something or frustrated, I used to make them do jumping jacks and run around the house, like when they were little. And or I would chase them, or we would run, and then magically they would feel better. Strong emotions tied to anxiousness, especially, do not like activity. They don't like for us to be active physically. It's kind of it really helps them start to kind of get past it. And keep that list, and we're gonna come back to it. Okay. Now we're going to shift into that kind of elementary age all the way till we start getting into the intermediate or middle school level. Okay. They will automatically start having a way more improved emotional understanding. And some of that happens through social interaction too, not just through parents at this point, especially as they get into the school age and they're around kids their age, they start to see different emotional responses, right? Like if you talk to any kid in, I don't know, 6th grade, 5th grade, they'll say, hey, they can point and tell you which kids usually, ask random questions or get up and walk around. I mean, they can tell you all those things because they can see it and observe it. They know that they can experience more than one emotion in a particular situation. They start to experience that. And they can also kind of have an awareness of what emotions might be happening from an event that could happen. They can start to understand that and feel that and anticipate it, which again is natural and normal. They can also begin to suppress or conceal negative reactions. And they can start to redirect their feelings. And this one's very important. They can start to really have a capacity for empathy, which goes back to what I was talking about earlier about the guilt feeling. You can feel guilty when you feel guilty, especially when you're younger. And then there's other thoughts that come with it too, like a conception of me as a person, like that kind of guilty feeling that kind of awakens early in childhood, combined with, okay, I'm here, like me is here, like a concept of yourself. Those are important because when you can't go to the next phase, which is a concept of others, until you have a concept of yourself. Right? So you have to have a me before you have a we. And when we have a concept of ourselves, and then we can start to have a concept of other people, then we can actually also have the concept that, oh, wait a minute, that happened to them. Maybe they feel sad about that, or maybe they feel happy about that, which is the beginnings of empathy. Beginnings of empathy are, I can start putting myself in their position. I can start feeling what they're feeling. I'm not them, but I can understand some things that they're experiencing. I cannot express powerfully enough how important this is. I would say that 95% of everything I do even when my clients don't know, is directed at building empathy. Because empathy is a skill that you can learn. Doesn't matter what age you are, you can learn how to do it, and it's like a muscle that you use and you can grow it. But it starts in childhood, especially in the later elementary years, 4, 5, 6th grade. Really, when it really starts, you can really take off. It's extremely important, because what it does is it sets us up for interactions later in life. Okay, so far we've talked about some pretty big emotional categories like shame and guilt and empathy. Those are big ones. And like I said, guilt and shame we can generate ourselves. We don't need a lot of help. Unfortunately, as we get older, we get that from other folks too. So I got a question here about, and Jennifer, I'm assuming you mean building empathy with like a 4th through 6th grader. Is that what you mean? I'm assuming that's what it is.
Yes.
Okay. So empathy basically is when we, like for example, there's a couple of parts of it. So taking another person's perspective, right? Becoming aware of how that person might feel about a given thing. Okay. One thing that you can do is when there's an interaction between kids, and let's say it doesn't go great, but then it's calmed down, and then you're talking to them, instead of saying, how do you think that made them feel? You can say, how do you think they felt? Because that's a totally different question, right? What do you think that was like for them? Not, how would you like for that to happen to you? You can say that, and that's okay, but that brings about a little more guilt than it does put them in the other person's spot. And these questions that I'm suggesting are not anything they can't answer. They have the capability to answer it. Now, they're not going to give you a dissertation on it, but they're going to be able to answer it. And they'll probably start, since it's a skill, it's something that you build over time. It's not something you learn after one time, right? You have to continue to do it. So for example, you could do, and I'm just making this up, like if you, even if you're watching a show or a movie or something, you could always even ask kids, randomly, golly, it seems like that would feel, whatever. What do you think they were thinking about right then? Or what do you think they were feeling right then? Or what do you think caused them to do that? What you're doing is asking them to take the perspective. Okay. And that's something that can be done, again, like I said, it's not a one-time thing, it's an overtime thing. It's a process. Because honestly, as we get older, the ability to take that perspective gets harder as the interactions get more difficult. Like clinically speaking, like if I jump into the clinical world, like when I'm working with couples, if they're mad at each other and I stop and go, you guys need to have empathy for each other. That doesn't even make sense. It's really hard when you're angry with someone to take their perspective. Now, when they're calmed down and we're having a conversation, even if they're still a little bit frustrated, you can do it a little bit better. It's easier when everyone's de-escalated, right? You can start. So I do that a lot when I have them do certain interactions with each other, and I ask a lot of specific questions that are really empathy building questions with them, just to take the other person's perspective. The second thing I would say, and I will say this starting now until probably till the day I die, we as adults, we have to also model those things that we're trying to teach, right? If we don't model empathy, then why would we expect for anyone to show empathy? It's not going to happen. I'm really more and more convinced about something that I feel really pretty strongly about. I think one role, like the biggest role adults can play, is be the best adult, not perfect, but best adult you can be, so that kids want to be adults. Like, we're not trying to be perfect because we're not, but we want to be the best adult we can be, so kids want to be adults. And that, so for example, with empathy, if we show empathy and we model that, then our kids are going to want to do that. And so I'll probably will say that phrase a lot as we go through, because I believe it. I think it's very important for us to think like that. And again, it's not about being perfect, because we're going to mess up. Matter of fact, I think we learn more when we mess up than when we're perfect. Well, we'll talk. That's another discussion for another day. Okay. Let me see. I'm going to talk more about have some more focused trauma discussions the next time we meet. I'm going to skip through some of this. This is just an example of like an emotion, like a process that might happen. And so if we have some kind of a trigger, we will always have a primary emotion first that will generate a secondary emotion. Okay. And the feeling of safety that comes from there, especially if there's a vulnerability involved, will really lead us down a certain path. Okay. So if we have a primary emotion of shame, and we feel emotionally connected with someone, we're more likely to go towards intimacy with that person. In other words, share with that person or be vulnerable with that person. If we have an emotion like shame, but we don't feel as safe emotionally with whoever that person is, we might do more anger or numbness or shut down, and we'll kind of attack or criticize or demand, or we'll stonewall. Okay. And so this becomes more nuanced as we get older. It's not as black and white when we're children as much as it is as we get into, especially into adolescence. So this this right here is basically, when we talk about safe connections, it's how securely attached we feel to whoever this caretaker or relationship is that we're around, right? So when we talk about attachment and being, and I'm sorry, y'all are about to hear my dog bark, I think. But when we talk about attachment, okay, attachment is extremely important in childhood, from childhood on, because basically, like I'll give you an example. So if you're a little kid and you're playing chase or tag and you're running, it's kind of fun. Basically, your goal is to get to a base, whatever that base is, that's where you want to go. And as soon as you get to that base, then they can tag you, but you'll never be it. You'll be safe. You'll be there. And the same is true as we get it even into adolescence and adulthood. We don't want to chase or run from those people that we feel like should be our base. Like, we don't want to do that. It makes us feel either angry or shut down or frustrated, right? And so when we feel more emotionally connected, we can have it's easier for us to have more difficult conversations. So translate this into adulthood for kids. If we can be their safe place, their safe base, doesn't mean that we can't be upset or angry or anything like that. But if we can be their safe place, then they will continue to come to us with vulnerabilities, which is really what you want. You really want it when they get into adolescence. Because in adolescence, there's all kinds of crap going on, all kinds of stuff. Okay, we'll talk more about that as we get there. Okay. Here's just a couple of just general principles about emotions, and this is true. This is actually true across the developmental spectrum. It's emotions are more like data; they're not directives. In other words, they don't tell us what to do. They give us a lot of information about how we're feeling. They don't have a memory. In other words, you could have an emotion, like a really strong emotion when you're 8 years old, and the exact same emotion when you're 38 years old, but a totally different context or totally different situation. They don't have memories. In other words, but they can be tied to memories, which is kind of interesting. We talked about this, the idea of there being a primary and secondary emotion, and they do happen, and it's okay that they happen. Okay, so let me stop there for a second. Tell me, hang on a second. Let me get back over here real quick. Oh, let me get back over here. Sorry, here we go. All right, now let me jump back over here real quick. You guys have any questions about anything we've talked about so far? All right, good. I guess it's good. I don't know if it's good or bad. That's funny, Terry. Yeah, Terry, you're having a great experience because you're right in the middle of hearing children yell at each other, because they're very escalated right now. That's fun. That's always fun too. So one of the things about emotions as we get into adulthood is that you can tell when you work with adults, those adults that learned somewhere, somewhere, learned emotional regulations, and those that didn't. And just FYI, most of the adults you're going to work with didn't really learn it that well, because that's why they're coming to you in the first place. And I'm not throwing people under the bus. It's just, it's something they can learn. They just never did. They either avoid it, they don't like it, so they try to shove it down, and they just don't think about it. When I first started doing therapy, I'm not sure why I did that. I think I just felt uncomfortable talking about it with my clients, but I used to not talk as openly about like emotional reactions and things with my clients when I first started. But now the first session, I'm like, I dive right in. We're like, y'all, this is going to be we're going to talk about emotions. I'm going to ask you how you feel. And I make a joke of it, right? Hey, we're in therapy. I'm always going to ask how you feeling, I make it like light of it, but I periodically throughout the session will ask, how are you feeling? Or if I want to be specific about thoughts, I'll say, tell me what you're thinking, right? Sometimes they get those confused. I'll say, how are you feeling? Or what feelings are you having? And they'll tell me thoughts, which is not the same thing. Thoughts and feelings are not the same, even though they interact with each other. So, okay. If you guys want, do you guys have any questions about anything? First of all, before I jump into something else. Okay. All right. I was gonna do, let me get over here, get to the right place. Sorry, I'm trying to, there we go. If you want, we can jump right into the next area. I was going to talk a little bit about, on the heels of emotional regulation, I was going to talk a little bit about parenting. And the reason why I do that too is because if you do clinical work long enough, that will, the parenting questions will come automatically. You'll automatically hear them. And so we talk about it in here because this is a great class to talk about parenting, because parenting also changes over the life or developmental stage, like inside of a a relationship, when couples get together, and then that's one stage, and then they have kids, that's another stage, and then the kids get older, like they go through their stages. Those are other stages that couples go through until kids leave the house, and then that's another stage, right? So there's like multiple stages happening at the same time, both for the individual, the couple, and then their kids, right? As we go through the life cycle. And so if you guys are cool with that, we can jump into that. My first, I think what I'll do actually is I'm going to put you guys in breakout rooms. So there'll be like, how many we have? We got, I think we have like 17 or so. There'll be like 3 of you in a room or 4. And all you're going to do, this is your opportunity right now to talk about how awesome or how not awesome you were parented. Okay? People are laughing. Why y'all laughing at that? That's not funny.
I don't think we have enough time.
And this is not a me. This is, again, I am not trying to throw parents under the bus. This is just, we learn a lot of things when we're little. We learn how to parent also sometimes when we're younger. Now we can change our ideas, but when we talk about parenting, I always like to know where we start from, right? We start from who we saw. So this is your chance to just talk in general about all you're going to say is, I felt like this is the parenting style I was used on me, and you can fill in that blank. Okay. And then we're going to jump into the parenting kind of stuff. If you guys are cool with that, that actually might be kind of fun. I can't wait to see what you guys say either. I'll jump in and out of the breakout rooms. We'll do this for probably 5, 6 minutes, something like that. Okay. Let's see. There we go. All right. You'll get a little link. It'll pop up. You'll just join it.
Recording.
If you're talking, I don't know if it's just me, but I can't hear you.
Oh, I can't hear either.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
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 Yeah, I was talking. Thanks for saying something. Sometimes my on Zoom, it switches to my, like another microphone for some reason. Anyway, did I cut anybody off in mid-sentence when I broke you out of groups? Sometimes that happens. All right. Anybody want to share? Your favorite thing about being parented?
Well, in our group, we were talking about, how our mothers and fathers act with us. And I was telling them that in my case, my mom was better at building empathy. I mean, every time I did something wrong, maybe I had an argument with my sisters, or I had an issue at school, she always told me, well, you need to think about how she felt, you made your sister feel really bad when you did this and that, or if I had an issue at school, she will tell me, okay, if that boy is bugging you, then stay away. I mean, don't get in trouble. Don't make the argument bigger. And even as an adult, she's always telling me, okay, when you're having this issue with your daughter, please model it. Do it the way you want her to act.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, my dad is very different. He's like, when I was a boy, he was very different. For example, if I had an issue at school, he will tell me, okay, if they hit you, just hit him back, get revenge, or
Yeah.
if they call you something, you call them back, even worse, And even as an adult, if I call him and I tell him, hey, I have this issue, and hey, don't worry about it, just do this against them, or call a lawyer, whatever. Like, he's always trying to get revenge,
Yeah.
So in my case, I trust more my mom. I mean, I call more my mom. I have more connection with her.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
they're divorced. I mean, they got divorced when I was 10, and now I'm 45. So that was a long time ago. So I'm more connected to my mom.
Yeah. 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 I think, yeah, I have a lot of questions about that, Edgar, but we're going to keep going. That's good. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. That's good. Anybody else? And you don't have to share if you don't want to. It's not a requirement.
Okay, I will share. Edgar made me think of something. He made me think of my mom. I forgot to say that. My mom was the exact same way. Now that I think about it, she wasn't evil. I've always saw her like a little angel. She was just not vindictive. Everything was, baby, kill him with kindness. Kill him with, when those teachers say something you don't like, kill him with kindness. It was never throw a rock at him or get back. It was like every time somebody did something that I didn't like, or it was just always so soothing. It's okay. You'll get them next time. It was always so positive. I don't know what was up with that, but I tried that with my kids thinking it will work. And they're like, what is wrong with you? Like, they see it as the opposite. They see it as, you're not on my side. You're not supporting me. Like, you're on their side. You're against me. But when I was younger, I took it as it was soothing. So it's just weird. But to me, that was comforting for her to be so positive. And it was like she was so different from other mothers, because other mothers would be like, they would be at the school, they would be yelling at the teachers and the principal, and the child was right. But my mom was like, oh no, the child is not right. It was more like, get on their page, get on the adults page, do what they say do. So that made me trust her more. And yeah, it definitely made me closer to her. And I was appreciative of that, that she was like that. But yeah, it's my mother.
Was anybody's dads like that?
No.
I'm just curious.
My dad was more positive.
My
than
dad
mom
was like that.
Okay.
Yeah, my dad was like that. He was very nice, loving, laid back, just, whatever. He had girls too, so I'm sure that played a part in that. And my mother was the strict one that would discipline us. And I can't remember my dad ever yelling at me or giving me a spanking or anything like that. But
Yeah.
again, he had girls, but in our group, we were talking about dysfunction and how so many families now deal with dysfunction, which is now kind of like the new normal. And sometimes when you're growing up and your parents, you know, you may feel like as a kid, you know, it was unfair life or your family broke up or whatever, it can carry over into your adulthood. And so a lot of times, and especially for me, I overcompensate. I have a daughter, I have 2 boys, so I'm overly affectionate. I'm all in their business, you know, I want to know everything that's going on because I didn't have that when I was growing up. I want to be in every activity that they're involved in. I'm rearranging. I am going to be present because those were the things that I was yearning for as I was growing up. So it does carry over. But the other piece to that, a lot of times your parents are growing up when they're raising kids and they don't know any better. They don't know what to do. And they didn't have those examples. So that was a little bit of what we touched on in our group.
Yeah.
Same. Yeah, we were talking about the generational emotional dismissing that our parents experienced, especially like for my parents. I'm in my 40s. My parents were raised by very cut and dry, like non-emotional parents at all. And so then they were, you know, they passed that down to us. And so, I mean, I personally try to be different than that, than I was raised, because I don't want to dismiss. I want to coach, to use your 2 examples. But so it was interesting to see the correlation and how it kind of trickled down to each one of us and how we, in our group at least, wanted to parent differently or not parent at all.
Yeah.
One thing that I forgot to mention, like in our group that like clicked with me, is how like I was the baby and the only girl, and I was parented differently than my brothers were. Like, and I actually see it like as a nanny too. Like the girls are always like parented differently than the boys are.
Oh, yeah.
My brothers are always quick to let me know that I had a completely different experience than them, partially because I'm the only girl and because there's a 10-year age gap between my youngest older brother and myself. And so they're always talking about their experience, the 2 of them 2 years apart, you know, close together, 2 boys, when my parents were much younger, and just all of the different variables there. You know, because my parents were in their early 20s when they had my brothers. And then my mom was, I think, 34 when she had me. So it's just 2 totally different, you know, experiences. You know, the financial stability was very different for me than it was for them growing up. And my parents' willingness to like sign them up for activities versus what I was able to pretty much anything. I was like, I want to try ballet. Okay, do ballet. Oh, I want to do a drama camp. Okay, well, let's do a drama camp. And my brothers didn't get that kind of, you know, experience because they just didn't have the funds. They didn't have the time and the, you know, all the energy and everything for that. So
That's very true. I just want to piggyback on that. That's the same way that I was brought up. My sisters are like 5 and 10 years older than me. And my mom had them when she was like very young, 14, 15 years old, to where she had me when she's like 25, late 20s. So to them, they call my mother by her first name and I'll call her mom. And it's like, I'm asking them, why are you calling her by first name? Like I'm the only one calling her mom because she had me at a decent age, you know, when she was an adult and not a kid. So, and then with my children, they're like 10 years apart. And I've noticed my parenting style is very different because of the age gap, like my 23-year-old, and then I have a 13-year-old. And the 23-year-old is like, you was much stricter with me than you are with her. It's like, yeah, I probably was because I had you in my 20s and I had to be at work at a certain time. So I had to be strict with you and I had to make you independent. But I had the 13-year-old in my 30s to where I gave her a little bit more room, and she's probably a little bit more spoiled and I'm a little bit more patient with her. So she's a little bit undisciplined, but we're working on it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So one thing I want us to think about, and one of the reasons why I do this exercise is not just so we can, I think there's nothing wrong with us discussing how we were parented and what our childhood was like. That's very valuable. And I do that with all my clients. The one thing that I think I want you guys to think about, because I think this clinically speaking is very important. Like, at what age does it become our responsibility to work through dysfunction that might have happened to us, but not because of us? Right? Like, at what age does that happen for us as people, as adults? And the reason why I say that is because we don't have to, first of all, we don't have to repeat whatever dysfunction happened to us. We don't have to repeat it, but sometimes we do. And the second thing is, we oftentimes don't have a good perspective of our parents until we become parents. We have a little bit better perspective once we are parents. Not that we have to be parents to have a better perspective of our parents, it just sometimes helps. And so one of the things that I always try to push with my clients, and I don't necessarily do this like in their face or anything, but is to begin to take kind of responsibility for yourself and your actions and your thoughts and your feelings, separate and apart from what might have happened to you. Because some things happen to us, right? But not because of us. But some things happen to us because of us. You know, if we're kind of little buttholes when we're kids, that's a problem that we experience. But if something happened to us and we didn't have anything to do with it, it wasn't in our control, and we didn't ask for it, and it was just brought on to us. Like Edgar mentioned, Edgar mentioned divorce. My parents are divorced. That's not my fault. It wasn't my choice. You know, that's something that happened to me, not because of me. Right. And we can talk about any kind of trauma, abusive trauma, divorce is a trauma, loss is a trauma. Although we could talk about, and there's different levels of trauma we could talk about. Those happen to us, but not because of us. At what point, though, even inside those traumas, are we, is it kind of on us to then change or grow or whatever that looks like, right? That's something that I want us to think about, mainly because it's fine to have these exercises, and I do these on purpose because I want us to, we need to know where we come from to know where we're going. The same is true for our clients. But if we just had this discussion right now and we just left it with our clients, then they're not moving forward. They're still trapped in wherever this was happening. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So I think that those discussions become more and more important. And it depends on this, and it depends on what you're working with clients on, obviously. There's different situations for different things. If I sat down with each one of you individually right now and said, hey, tell me more about your childhood, and I kind of understood it a little bit more and asked you some questions about it, you could tell me, and each one of you would have some different experiences in your childhood. And some of those experiences made you who you are today. And some of that's not bad. Right? Now, some of it you might not like, but some of it you might be fine with. That's the second thing, is sometimes we need to point out, it seems like you've really learned to do XYZ thing, even in spite of these things that happened or didn't happen, So my point about that is, when we talk about childhood, because we will with our clients, that we don't just camp out in childhood and make a camp in there and dig all in there, and because we live now, we're in today, right? We want to move forward from today, but we have to understand some things. So our past doesn't really excuse anything. It just explains a lot of things. And if I'll give you a side note on trauma, and we'll talk about this more, and because we're gonna have to stop here in a second, but a lot of trauma work now is helping people become more present, because what's happened is the event happened in the past, and everyone knows the event happened in the past, but the emotions get trapped in the past and they won't move forward. And the way you help people is move them emotionally forward. We'll talk more about that as we go through the semester, because trauma care is extremely important in clinical work. All right. Okay. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to stop, and we're gonna jump into a little bit of parenting discussion in our next class, but we'll start talking really specifically about child and adolescence. We'll start bridging the gap there. And so in the meantime, if you have any questions, you can always let me know. But other than that, I'll see
Can
you
I
guys
ask a quick
next
question?
time. Yeah.
Can I ask
yeah.
a question about the assignment that's due this week, the first
Yes.
exercise?
Yeah.
I know there's no citations really to worry about because
Nope.
the textbook.
Right.
So can you just tell me, what are you expecting in terms of APA style on that? Like, what does that assignment look like from an APA standpoint?
I have no expectations of that because I already know where
Okay.
it's coming from.
Okay, cool. Just making sure.
Yeah. No, yeah. Thanks for asking. Yeah, this is not a research paper like essay. It's just a literally like question answer.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right. Hey guys, have a good weekend. Thanks for joining me.
You too. Happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
Yes, happy Father's Day. Bye.
Happy
Bye-bye.
Father's Day.
Day.